Envelope was already open when I found it. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. Not my stepfather's car in the driveway at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Not even the smell of his cologne still hanging in the hallway, even though I hadn't seen him since my mother's burial 3 weeks earlier. The envelope, already open. My name on the front in my mother's handwriting, and the flap torn back like someone had been in a hurry. I didn't say anything. I picked it up, slid the letter out, and read it standing there in the kitchen with my coat still on. She had known. My mother had known for a long time. I should back up. My mother's name was Rosemary. She was 58 when she died, which everyone at the funeral kept saying was too young. Like, there's an age where losing your mother starts to feel appropriate. She had been sick for about 14 months. Ovarian cancer, caught late. The kind of diagnosis that gives you just enough time to say goodbye, but not enough time to feel ready. I moved back home to Connecticut 8 months before she passed. I gave up my apartment in Philadelphia, put my graphic design work on hold, and came home to help. My stepfather, I'll call him Stuart, he had been married to my mother for 11 years. He wasn't a bad man, not obviously. He was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and forgot your birthday. Charming at parties, quiet at dinner. My mother loved him, and that was enough for me. For a long time, that was enough for me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known until those last few months, was that Stuart had a problem. He gambled, not casually, not fantasy football in Super Bowl squares. He gambled the way some people drink. Steadily, secretly, in a way that had slowly hollowed out everything they'd built together. My mother found out about the debt about 2 years before she died. She told me she had considered leaving him. Instead, she made a decision I only fully understood after I read that letter. She quietly restructured her estate. The house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Fairfield County that my grandparents had originally bought in 1971 and left to my mother, was placed into a revocable living trust 6 months before her diagnosis. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. Stuart was given what her attorney called a limited right of occupancy. He could live in the house until he remarried or until the trust was dissolved by the trustee, which was me. He had no ownership. He had no ownership. He had no ownership. He couldn't refinance, couldn't borrow against it, couldn't do anything with that house except live in it. My mother never told him exactly what she'd done. She told him she'd updated the paperwork. She told me nothing either. Not until that letter. She wrote it 6 weeks before she died, sealed it, and gave it to her attorney with instructions to leave it at the house for me after the funeral. Stuart had opened it first. I didn't confront him that day. I want to be clear about that. Because some people hear this story and think I was being passive, or that I was afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of him. I was careful. There's a difference. I took photos of the envelope. I took photos of the letter. I called my mother's attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my grandmother's estate years earlier and who my mother had trusted completely. And I told her what I'd found. Patricia told me to document everything and come see her in the morning. She also told me something that made my stomach drop a little. She said, "He's already called me twice this week." Stuart had been calling Patricia asking questions about the house, asking about the deed, asking whether the trust could be dissolved now that my mother had passed. Patricia had answered his questions carefully and told him that as trustee, I would need to be involved in any decisions. Stuart had, according to Patricia, not taken that well. I drove home and made dinner. Stuart's car was gone by the time I got back. I ate alone, and I didn't sleep much. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Stuart came and went from the house on no particular schedule. He had his own key, obviously, and technically he still had the right to be there. I watched. I noticed things. He had started bringing someone with him. I never met her formally. I saw her twice from my car, younger than him by maybe 15 years, always dressed like she was going somewhere nice. The second time I saw them together, they were sitting in his car in the driveway and she was scrolling through something on a tablet showing him the screen. I couldn't see what it was from where I was parked. Later, I would find out. She had been looking at properties, specifically vacation properties. Specifically, a portfolio of short-term rental listings in the Florida Keys. The math, when I eventually understood it, was ugly. Stewart's gambling debts were somewhere north of $190,000. The house, if sold, would net somewhere between $180,000 and $740,000 in the current market. Stewart had apparently decided that his limited right of occupancy was a technicality he could work around. That if he could get the house sold, he could take his share and disappear south with a woman whose name I still don't know and a dream of owning beachfront property in Monroe County. What he needed to make that happen was my signature on the paperwork. He didn't ask me for it. That's the part I still think about sometimes when I'm trying to understand who Stewart actually is. He didn't come to me and make his case. He didn't sit down and say, "I need to sell the house. Here's my situation. Can we work something out?" He didn't do any of that. Instead, he forged my signature. I found out on a Wednesday morning in April. Patricia called me before I'd finished my coffee. She had received documents from a title company, a company I had never heard of, had never contacted, had never authorized to do anything. The documents were a purchase and sale agreement for my mother's house. Sale price, $710,000. Closing date, 3 weeks out. Buyer, an LLC with a Delaware registration Patricia said she recognized as a shell company structure commonly used to obscure the identity of a real estate investor. My signature was on the seller's line. I had not signed anything. Patricia's voice was very steady when she told me this. She had clearly been in situations before where she needed to deliver terrible news without letting the person on the other end of the phone fall apart, because she just kept talking in this calm, measured way while I sat there with my coffee going cold in my hand. She said she had already put in a call to a real estate attorney colleague of hers who specialized in fraud cases. She said she wanted me to come in that afternoon. She said, "Do not call Stewart. Do not let him know you know. Come in and let's talk first." I said, "Okay." I hung up and I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. I wasn't crying. I want to say that not because I'm proud of it, but because I think it matters for the rest of what happened. I wasn't scared either. I was just clear. In a way I hadn't been since my mother got sick. Since everything got blurry and hard and grief-adjacent, I was suddenly completely clear. I went inside and I made another cup of coffee and I wrote down everything I remembered from the past 3 months. Every time I'd seen Stewart at the house, every time his car had been in the driveway when I came home, every conversation we'd had, every time I'd noticed something missing, a small bronze clock my mother kept on the mantel, a set of silver picture frames from the hallway, a piece of jewelry I'd been planning to ask Patricia about because it had been in my mother's drawer and now wasn't. Then I drove to Patricia's office. The real estate fraud attorney's name was Kevin. He was maybe 40, wore the kind of suit that costs more than my monthly car payment, and got very still and focused when Patricia walked him through the documents. He asked me several questions. He asked whether I had any existing relationship with the title company. No. Had I signed anything in the past 6 months related to the property? Only the documents Patricia had given me when I was formally named trustee. Had I given anyone power of attorney? No. He looked at the signature on the purchase agreement for a long time. "This is a decent forgery," he said, which was not what I expected him to say. "Someone either had access to a document with your real signature and worked from it, or they've seen your signature enough times to approximate it. But it won't hold up. The notarization is going to be the problem for them." The notary stamp on the documents listed a notary whose license, Kevin had already confirmed, had lapsed 14 months prior. Stewart had forged my signature, paid someone to stamp it, and hadn't bothered to check whether the notary was still licensed. Kevin called it sloppy. Patricia, who had known my mother for over a decade and had helped her build that trust specifically to protect against something like this, looked at the papers on her desk and said quietly, "Rosemary knew." I had to take a breath. We did not stop the sale immediately. This was Kevin's call, and Patricia agreed with him, and after they explained it, I agreed too. If we blocked the sale the moment we discovered the fraud, Stewart would know we knew, and he would have time to move money, destroy documents, or disappear. We had 3 weeks until the closing date. We used those 3 weeks. Kevin worked with a forensic accountant who began pulling records, estate accounts, my mother's bank statements from her final 2 years, transactions that shouldn't have happened. What they found was not small. Stewart had been making withdrawals from a joint account he still had access to, an oversight in the estate paperwork that Patricia took personal responsibility for and has since corrected for months. The withdrawals were structured carefully to stay below $10,000, the federal threshold that triggers automatic bank reporting. Just under, every time. Some were labeled household maintenance. One was labeled medical copay dated 6 days after my mother died. The total came to just over $47,000. The forensic accountant filed the report. Kevin contacted the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit. A federal wire fraud referral was made because the shell company purchasing the house was registered in Delaware and the funds were moving across state lines. I went home every night and made dinner and watched television and did not call Stewart. He called me twice during those 3 weeks. Once to ask if I was doing okay. Once to ask, casually, whether I'd given any thought to what comes next with the house, whether I wanted to keep it or whether it might make more sense to liquidate and move on. I told him I was still figuring things out. I kept my voice even. I said, "There's no rush." He agreed there was no rush. 3 days before the closing, Kevin told me they had everything they needed. He asked if I wanted to be in the room. I said yes. The closing was scheduled at a title company office in Stamford. Glass-fronted building, conference room on the 4th floor, a table long enough to seat 12. I arrived early with Kevin and a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit named Sergeant Okafor, who was not in uniform but whose presence in that room was unmistakable. Stewart arrived 8 minutes late. He was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before. Dark navy, expensive. He had his girlfriend with him. She was carrying a tote bag and looking at her phone, and she stopped walking when she saw me sitting at the table. Stewart stopped too. He recovered faster than I expected. He actually smiled. He said, "Oh, I didn't know you were going to be here." I said, "It's my house." He sat down. His girlfriend sat 1 chair away from him. The representative from the title company came in and began arranging documents, and then Kevin slid a folder across the table and said, very calmly, that before anything was signed, there were some matters related to the validity of the existing purchase agreement that needed to be addressed. Stewart's jaw tightened. Kevin laid it out. The forged signature, the lapsed notary, the fraudulent purchase agreement, the wire transfers, the structured withdrawals, the federal referral. He spoke the way Patricia had spoken to me on the phone, steady, complete, no room for interruption. When he finished, the room was very quiet. Stewart said, That's not, I had authorization." Kevin said, "From whom?" Stewart said nothing. Sergeant Okafor placed his badge on the table and introduced himself. Stewart's girlfriend stood up. She picked up her tote bag and she walked out of the conference room without saying a word to anyone, including Stewart. The door closed behind her. I watched Stewart watch her leave, and I watched something go out of his face that I don't have a word for exactly. He was arrested in the parking garage on his way out of the building. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything to him as Sergeant Okafor walked him out. I had thought, in the weeks leading up to that morning, that I might want to say something, that there would be some line I'd been saving, some final word. But when the moment came, I just sat there and I felt the quietest I had felt since my mother died. Kevin shook my hand. Patricia, who had driven up herself and waited in the lobby, came up when I texted her. She hugged me for a long time in the elevator and didn't say anything, and neither did I. The legal process moved faster than I expected, partly because of the federal involvement, and partly because Stewart, once he understood the full scope of what Kevin and Sergeant Okafor had assembled, decided not to make it harder on himself than it already was. He pled guilty to 3 charges: forgery in the 1st degree under Connecticut state law, wire fraud, and structuring. That last one is the federal charge for deliberately keeping bank withdrawals under the reporting threshold to avoid detection. His sentencing hearing is scheduled for later this year. Federal sentencing guidelines for wire fraud alone carry up to 20 years, though his attorney has been negotiating, and Kevin told me to expect something in the range of 3 to 5 with restitution. The $47,000 will be returned to the estate. The house is mine. I have thought a lot about what my mother knew and when she knew it. She never told me directly that she was protecting the house from Stuart. She never said, "I don't trust him with your inheritance." She just built a wall, quietly, and left me a letter explaining what it was made of. And she did it while she was sick and exhausted and still managing to be graceful at dinner parties. She played the long game from inside a hospital gown, and she never once let Stuart see her cards. I think about the letter sometimes. The way her handwriting looked, still careful, still her, even near the end. She wrote, near the bottom of the second page, "You were always the one who paid attention. I'm counting on that. I paid attention, Mom. I'm still living in the house." I repainted the front porch in the color she always wanted, a deep sage green that she had a swatch of taped inside her kitchen cabinet for years, waiting for a weekend that never came. I made it one Saturday in October with a roller brush and an old radio and her dog Pepper sleeping in a patch of sun on the front step. It looked exactly like the swatch. I keep records of everything now. Every financial account, every legal document, every transaction related to the estate. I have a folder, physical, not just digital, that I update monthly. My mother's attorney told me once that the most powerful thing any person can do in a legal dispute is simply to have written everything down before anyone thought it would matter. I think about that a lot. If anyone reading this is going through something similar, a parent's estate, a step-parent with access to accounts you haven't fully audited, paperwork you've been meaning to read more carefully, please read the paperwork. Call the attorney. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable to ask. My mother spent months quietly doing what I should have known to do alongside her, and she did it alone because she didn't want to burden me with one more thing while I was already grieving something I could see coming. She protected me the way she always had. Quietly, completely, without asking for credit. I hung a photo of her in the hallway last week, one from a family vacation when I was maybe 9, her laughing at something off camera, mid-sentence, her hand raised like she was about to make a point. She looks like someone who knows exactly what she's doing. She always did. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes for someone to forge another person's signature on a legal document. Not the mechanics of it, the decision. The moment where you pick up a pen and you decide that what you want is worth more than what's true, more than what's right, more than what will happen to the person whose name you're about to steal. Stuart made that decision, and I think he made it because, somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that he was owed something, that 11 years of marriage entitled him to a shortcut, that my mother's death had created a window, and that I was just an obstacle standing between him and the other side of it. That's the thing about greed when it goes unchecked for long enough. It stops feeling like greed. It starts feeling like logic. What Stuart didn't account for, what people like Stuart almost never account for, is that the people they underestimate have been paying attention the whole time. My mother paid attention for years. She watched, and she learned, and she quietly built a structure that would outlast her, that would hold even when she couldn't. She didn't do it out of bitterness. She did it out of clarity. There's a version of that story where she confronts him, where she makes demands, where she spends her final months fighting. She chose a different version. She chose to be 3 steps ahead instead of 1 step behind. And that choice is the reason I'm sitting in her house right now writing this. I used to think that intelligence meant knowing the right answers. I understand now that it mostly means asking the right questions early enough to matter. My mother asked herself, "What happens to this house if I'm not here to protect it?" And she answered that question before it became urgent. That's not luck, that's discipline. That's the kind of thinking that doesn't get celebrated, because it's quiet and slow and it looks like nothing until the moment it looks like everything. The resilience part. That one I had to find myself. There were weeks after my mother died when I was just going through the motions, making coffee, answering emails, feeding her dog. Grief doesn't announce itself cleanly. It shows up sideways, in the middle of ordinary things, and you either let it stop you, or you keep moving and feel it anyway. I kept moving, not because I'm unusually strong, but because my mother had left me something to protect, and I wasn't going to let exhaustion make that decision for me. Stuart is facing federal sentencing. The money will be returned. The house is mine. None of that happened because the universe intervened. It happened because my mother made careful choices, because Patricia kept meticulous records, because Kevin knew exactly what a lapsed notary stamp meant, because I didn't make a single phone call I wasn't supposed to make during those 3 weeks. Every good outcome in this story traces back to a decision someone made to do the right thing carefully, not just instinctively. That's what I want people to take from this. Not that justice always wins. I'm not naive enough to promise that. But that the people who prepare, who document, who stay calm when everything in them wants to scream, who treat integrity as a practice and not just a feeling, those people give justice something to work with. My mother gave me that. I'm trying to pass it forward.